similarities. Aha.
And the rest of us are in Colorado. So I am going to talk mostly about wells and just a little bit about septics, and then I might dig a little bit more into septics with you, Emmy. I can have a conversation with you at another time about our local rules. So,
and Heather, I actually have to zip off at about quarter till, like maybe just before quarter till.
I don't think it'll be that long. Perfect.
Okay.
So this is, and I should have prefaced this by, I probably won't be a whole hour for sure on this kind of thing, because I am not an expert in either one of these things. I'm going to tell you like the things to look out for, and then you should all take classes in wells and septics. There's going to be one on wells for sure. You can get one with your state will have them. They shouldn't be more than like 1 hour classes. I've seen all day ones on irrigation, and I think those are great. I've never taken one. I've taken like a 2 hour class on irrigation, and I've taken the 1 hour classes on wells, and I think that's fine. And septic, same deal. If you get an opportunity to sit with, I took a septic class a couple weeks ago. In our county, there's a lot of rules. And so taking a 1 hour class is fine. You just want to keep reminding yourself of what the rules are. So don't let this preclude you from taking other classes. So if you have a well on a property, so Nick, in your area, do you have outside of like Bozeman, I'm assuming would have all central systems, but once you get into the rural areas, you got a ton of well and septics, right?
Absolutely. And it's in those areas could be across the street from each other in a lot of different areas.
Same with us. So we'll have like an area, and septics is a big one too, where Forest Lakes, I'm going to use as an example, everything down low, everybody has central water. But if you're in a certain like 1/3, 1/2 acre lot, you're all going to have central sewer. And then outside of that, you might have an acre that has central sewer, and then you might have the one next door that has the septic. So you just have to be really cognizant of what you're dealing with. And you never want to forget to look into these things as you're taking a listing, or if you have a buyer, obviously. So with a well, there's, I'm going to start talking about water. There's two things you care about. One of them is going to be depth of the well, how deep it is, and then yield of a well is how much it produced when it was dug. So in our area in Colorado, I'm not going to pin myself because there's only a few of us here. I'm sure you're going to have the same state site. So for Colorado, and I'm sure it's the same in all the states, where wells are a state thing. You might have local regulations, and whenever you have local regulations about something, it's just like with laws. You have national laws, you have state laws that are kind of underneath and more severe than the national laws. And then, so we have the state rules for water, and that's who regulates our wells. And then underneath that, you might have local rules that say, oh, in this area, you can't do X, but it's mostly regulated by the state. The state's site, just all you have to remember is Division of Water Resources for Colorado, and everything's right on there. So just know if you have questions about something, you can, damn safety, you can find forms, apply for permits. They've done a really good job with this. Streamflows is a real fun one to look up if you're just like curious how things are doing. But most of this is, you're going to be on the wells. We have a local, if you have a local county site where they do mapping, in Durango, we happen, or La Plata County happens to do such a good job with their local mapping system. Right to the left here would be Montezuma County, and up here is San Juan County. This shows how different it is. So we have this amazing Google mapping tool. Over here, they have a very clunky tool, but you can still find some stuff. And then north, it's literally paper. Like you're literally looking up paper things in their county courthouse. So no luck there. I wanted to bring up one of mine. So one of the tools we have locally is to be able to do map layers, okay? And then I'm going down here. I can show you individually how to do this, but just know this is a thing you can do. It's on, how do you do this? Okay, go down, hydrology, water wells. How cool is this? It shows the well right there. So yes, you can go to your county site, but you can also click on this thing and there's the well, okay? So then you're like, oh, there's the permit number. So it's all right there. And then in the permit number, if it was done correctly, it's going to have those two things that you care about. It's going to have the depth and it's going to have the yield. So that might not be the right permit details. There might be some other thing, but usually you're going to find it all right there. And if not, know that when you're searching for anything on a state site, whether it's, I want to know if this, like I have to search for any, when I was looking for licensees and I was trying to get your like license number and I'm searching for, I'm going with your last name or something that is specific and can't be written wrong. Like maybe you spelled your first name a little bit differently. So I'm not going to be messing with first names or addresses of properties. I'm going to look up permit numbers because that's an exact number. You can use parcel numbers. That's an exact number. Just be careful when you're like, oh, I'm trying to look it up by the owner's last name. And what if the owner didn't, that was like 10 years ago and they didn't do it correctly to give it to the new owner, and you go, oh, I can't look up the permit. Just remember there's like certain things that are easier to look up than others. And if anytime there's a mapping system, that's the best way to do it. So let's go back to where is the well? Okay. Permits. So permits that you get could be, I'm going to go back to here. And again, I know this is our county site, but it's very true if you have any sort of mapping system that you easily could have. Let's say this one wasn't there and you know this property here has had a well forever and ever, like since the 80s, but there's nothing showing here. And there is one right there and there is one right there. And you know there's no house over here. This is a vacant lot, but you're like, well, maybe that's the well. What do you think? Know that when you're doing a permit for a well, that the person who's going to apply, as I did over here, I had to say where my well was probably going to be. And I think you had to be within, like in the state of Colorado, you have to be within like 150 feet, right? So I might say, okay, I'm showing them on the map. I'm going to drill it somewhere around here. And they go, oh, I'm just going to write it in as this. So you might have where it appears to be actually off the property, but it's your well. Okay. So this is not an exact science. Just know that you click on it and you're bringing it up and you go, okay, so I'm going to click on this. And I'm like, wait, no, John Greeny, he was the owner over here a couple people ago. So it can be really confusing because you're like, wait, I'm so confused. All you have to know is, at least in Colorado, you call that state number, the local number. So everyone will probably have, like, we have a division of water resources that's a local, and I 970-247-1845. I know that number because I've called it so many times as an agent when I was selling. And I will get they're called water commissioners. You get the water commissioner on the phone. Make sure you have this up in front of you with the numbers. Like, okay, I'm looking at, oh wait, that's not the right thing. You get the well permit up. Hold on. So let's say you either searched on the water resources or I'm getting this permit up. You call the water commissioner. They'll be able to pull it up with you on the phone and say, hey, do you mind looking this up for me, or call me when you can? Just have it up on your computer and say, I'm looking at this permit. Is there any way that this one is for the property next door? So they can help you kind of brainstorm that and say, you know, I actually think this is for that property. So then when you're listing it, it might not be exact, but you're saying, here's the permit that the Division of Water Resource found. We think this is for the proper well, right? So you're just giving all the information you can. Just know that when you're dealing with old properties, I'd say maybe 25% of the time, it's not a slam dunk. You can't really know that the one you're looking at is the right one because people have bought and sold their property so many times over the years. So another reason, so because I had to do a permit and I kind of showed them, oh, it's going to be on this property somewhere. My well's actually all the way back there. So this is just where the permit was for. It's not where the actual well is. Does that make sense? This is a site that just gathers information and puts it there and makes it easier for you. But it doesn't preclude you finding out more information. Okay. So sorry, I keep like making you dizzy. I forgot to do this. So when you click on, in ours, it says view well permit. So it doesn't matter how you get there, but this is the actual, this isn't like a printable thing. There will be a place that somewhere, image documents, somewhere you can print it, but it'll show you where it's at. This is the information. I wish I had one on me that was finished. I think I didn't. Permit expired. Okay, so this one expired. This isn't my actual permit. There was one that was finished. So on it, it'll have area irrigated. It'll say permitted limits. And then it'll say like all the other stuff. So if there was a depth and a use, is anybody on this call? Emmy, do you have a well where you live?
No.
No. Okay, let me think of one. Let me see if I can just find one real quick. I'm going to stop sharing. See if I can find a real well that we can bring up. I don't know why that's not bringing up my actual well. It's bringing up here, water well. Well constructed. This is, sorry, I figured I was going to show you how to do it, but then I should have like had an actual one on here that shows, okay, spotted from section lines. Does it show that it was decreed? I'm just looking for one that's actually, no, this is denied. We got to find one that's actually loaded. Be much more fun to show you. But okay, let's see. I'll try one more time and see if I can get it. Come on, come on, no whammies. Oh yeah, it's only showing the expired ones right now. But okay, so when you look at a permit in every state's going to be different, but in our state, you have to actually transfer it to the next person when you sell the property, right? And it used to be agents. We used to bring the permit and be like, okay, you got to take care of this within 15 days. And here's the thing you have to fill out. And I think I don't know if they do it at the closing company now or something. It's not like as big of a deal as it would be with septics. Just know you can always, it just should be transferred at closing. I don't know if there's like a fine if you don't do it. It's not like septics. Like septics are actually a big deal. Wells, if you forget, I don't know. There's some rule you're supposed to do it, but I don't think they go and fine you. But just know so many times people haven't transferred them over the years. So you pull up a permit, you're like, but that's not the owner. It was like 3 owners ago that they have it. So that's all I'm trying to find the permits. Now, knowing that you can call Division of Water Resources, and if you're looking at it and they're looking at it, they can help you with it and say, no, here's the one I see. I'll email it to you. I think this is the one you want to do. And there are water commissioners for every area. And the person that used to sit at the front desk of the Water Resources place, I don't even know if she was a water commissioner, but she knew everything. She had been there for so many years. She would just pull it up and be like, oh yeah, I think this is the one. And they were just so like helpful. But there are water commissioners for each area. So if your person has questions about the area, I'm about to dig a well and I want to know more about the area, put them with a water commissioner that actually understands the area and the aquifer, and they might be able to guide them a little bit. It's a free call and it would be somebody good to talk to. Now for the actual well. So when a person digs a well, the state requires them to do you have to do a permit to get the well. So each well is different. If you're above a reservoir, you're going to have a different permit than if you're below a reservoir, because like the one I was just showing you is above Lemon Reservoir. So when the rain falls, I was not allowed to collect it. I was not allowed to have a garden. I wasn't allowed to do anything because that belonged to the property owners below the dam because they owned those water rights. I could dig a well, but I'm not allowed to use it for any of those kind of purposes, right? So if somebody wants to use something for specific purposes, I want to have a farm, I want to have those kind of things. That might be like a water right. It's not irrigation, but they actually should look at the water right that's associated with the well. This doesn't come up very often, but you just know, like if you care about what you're using water for and you want to like have this huge agricultural type thing, you might want to think that that's important to them. And if it's not, most people, they just want a house. Like they don't care about all that stuff. So don't make this a big deal, but just know that different wells in different areas are going to have different rights. And I'm sure Montana is very similar to Colorado in that way, because we don't always have enough water for everyone that wants to do everything. So when you have a well so you got your permit and now you're going to dig your well, and in Colorado, you only have the right to have a well that performs a certain way. So our cutoff is 15 gallons a minute, 15 gallons a minute. That's actually a lot of water if you're using 15 gallons a minute, right? So that's the maximum you can get, but God help you, you're not going to get 15 gallons a minute. Like when you dig a well, it's not usually that good. But so then the well driller will dig the well, and then they have to put a report together that says this is how it did. So that is always associated with this well. into infinity. Like it is always shows up when you're pulling the permit. I was trying to do that for you. You look at the permit and then there's a place on it where the well driller signed it and they said, yep, here's what it did. It is 417 feet deep. And this is how I built the well. And I'm signing off that it was 14 gallons a minute, right? So you're never gonna hear this again in your realtor life, but so mine actually produced more than 15 gallons a minute. So my guy said, I'm gonna just say it was 15 gallons a minute because even though it's doing really well, the well is doing well. I'm going to say 15 gallons a minute because if you go over that, you have to put like a little meter on your well and show that you're not taking too much water out of the ground. You're never going to get into that. So really, they just sign what it was. It goes in there. But wells are never going to do better over time. Nowhere is it going to do better over time. It's always going to do worse over time. So as an area is developed and more people move in, as you are sucking water out of the ground that's been there for 10,000 years and you're using some of it up, you're always going to see that aquifer start doing a little bit worse over time. It's not something that you have to panic about. You just have to know that if you were selling a property and that well is a couple years old, might be about the same. Don't be advising people on that. But if it's 20 years old, it might do a lot worse than it did on day one when it was dug. So don't ever feel that when you see something that says, oh, it's 10 gallons a minute, like that's a good well. Don't say that because it might be 2 gallons a minute now. So there's two different kinds of tests that someone who has a well will want to do. There is a quantity test. Let's measure how well the well does. And then there's a quality test, which is how the water is. Is it safe to drink? Okay, so both of those are uber important to do. The quality test can be really cheap. The quantity test is very difficult and very hard to organize somebody to get up there. So quantity. Okay, so I could go into that, or should I talk about, let me still go into the cost of doing a well. So we're still talking about when they're drilling a well. When you're getting someone to a property, you've all seen those well drillers. They're enormous. It's like a crane, right? And it's got to go up into a subdivision. And know that if you're ever dealing with one of these super rural areas, like the place that I had my well done, they could never, ever get up there again. There was an old timer this was one of his last wells that he did. And he was the only one in the county that still had one of those old fashioned, like tinier trucks. And he had to get the whole thing around all the trees and get it set up. And no, most of these newer trucks, they are freaking enormous. So if you're ever in an area with a ton of trees, just be like, you've got to realize, like, you're looking at all this density. Just think about bringing a crane back there and what's that going to be like for the person. So if you're selling raw land, know that that's a difficult thing to do. It is so expensive to drill a well, and you have no idea how deep it's going to be. And the cost of drilling the well is going to have to do with what it hits. If you're going through sand, it is the cheapest thing ever. If you're going through granite, it's very expensive. So if you know what is underneath you, this is why the water commissioner can be helpful. So in mine, you're like going through dirt, and then you're going through sandstone, a little more expensive. And then you hit a big 8-foot granite boulder, and you got to get through the boulder. And that boulder might be like 10 times as much cost to get through. And then it goes back to soil. So they're charging you by the foot, depending on what they're going through. And he's going to know what he's going through because he's got the crane, right? He's got that, like, whatever, diamond bit or something. So know that that's very expensive. And if you're ever trying to help your person find a well driller, the state site will have it. Your local person will have a sheet that says all the well drillers in the area. You want to usually use, it's just like when I was doing surveys a couple of weeks ago, you want to use the old timer that's done a bunch of them in the area. So if you know that there's one well driller that you might have to wait a little longer for that's done a bunch of wells in that area, that's the person to use. And this is why your well commissioner can be your in your back pocket that can help you with those things. Let me see. Okay, and then I'd like to get in any questions on that, and then I'll go into the quantity and quality tests. Okay, so quantity test used to be, and it might still be this way in Bozeman, it's not here anymore, that I could go in the phone book and look up how, oh, don't let me forget to tell you about a witcher. I'll tell you about witchers. Okay, write that down. So quantity tests used to be that guy in the phone book that said well testing, and he would turn on the hose of your house and run it for 2 or 4 hours and he empties out your well and he empties out the house, right? And he lets it run out. And then he watches as the well starts getting more water in the pipe that comes out of the ground. And that's how you're testing how many gallons a minute is it refreshing. So can you imagine if you have a well that's not doing well anyway, how stressful that is to the owner of the house that you are running the water for 4 hours? Like, oh my God, what if you just ruin my well by doing that? So that can be a stressful thing to ask for, is having somebody test this well. And that is literally what this old guy did. He was $75 and he'd just stand there and he had a bucket and he'd test how many buckets came out of this well. And I paid him, or the person paid him $75. I don't know. I think you have to get an actual well driller now to do that test. And it's probably going to be expensive, but it's so important to know how much it's going to do it, especially if you have a family of 2 or some retirees that are living in the house and you got a family of 4 moving in, right? You might have a backup cistern or something. You want to know, like, are they going to be able to live here? So know all that's important. And just so you get an idea, like 15 gallons a minute, oh my gosh, more water than you could ever use. When you get down to that 5 gallons a minute, like family of 4, okay, it's fine. You get down to that 2 gallons a minute. If it says 2 gallons a minute on that permit and you know it's not going to be 2 gallons a minute anymore, like 2 gallons is not that great. I've sold a bunch of houses at 1.5 gallons a minute. It's fine, but it's tough. And you're going to have these areas where my well's 100 feet deep. You have other areas that are 1,000, 2,000 feet deep. They're really far down. And so if you have that half gallon a minute, a gallon a minute, you're probably looking at putting a cistern in to back up. And so the cistern's filling all night from your well, just dripping in, right? And then you need the water when you use it. It doesn't mean that you have to go pay someone to fill the cistern. It's just back there for if everybody's running laundry and showers and stuff like that. So just know that exists. Okay. So one more thing about drilling a well. If someone is trying to get a well drilled and they say, well, how do I know where to drill my well? It can't be next to the septic. There's all these state rules with like, you have to be this many feet away from a septic tank if you have one. But there is such things called a witcher, and they're real old school, you know, and they actually have metal poles now. It's only the real old timers that'll still have the birch sticks, but that's for real. And I asked more than one well driller, but my favorite response was from the old timer that I hired. I said, do you believe in witchers? Is it worth my time? And he said, well, you know, I don't like to believe that those things are for real, but they seem to be right they're accurate more than half the time. He said, so why would you not spend the $200 to get it done? And the crazy part is I hired 2 people to witch for my well, and I watched them work, and I didn't tell them where the other person had done. They both went to the same exact spot. They said, you'll get water over here, but it's not good quality. It was like the way the thing was doing it had sulfur in it. He goes, this is where you're going to get good quality. And it was like 3 different tributaries or whatever you want to call it came together, and I have a great well. So for the cost back then, it was like $150 a person. So I don't know, like I know Beeman and some of these bigger companies, they do have witching abilities, these metal poles. So have them go do it. Just say that you've heard that it works. Now quality, you can do quality. So there's a couple kinds of quality. Do you want to know that there's no cow poop in the water? Like that kind of stuff. Like I want to know I can drink it and not get sick and die. Or do you want to make sure gas drilling, that there aren't a lot of industrial kind of things in the water, because maybe you have gas industry around, or your person happens to be really panicky about fallout from, you know, when they're fighting fires and the red stuff they spill out of the planes. I've had people panic about that. It's really, really, really poisonous. And it's actually in a lot of people's wells in Colorado from what I'm reading, because it does kind of seep down in there. So if they're worried about those things, that's going to be kind of a different test than I'm worried about cow poop in my water because it's a real shallow well and I got cows everywhere. And then you have the other kind of test that's like, I want to test if there's minerals in my water. That like, that's what I get up in Lemon Lake and some of these rural areas here. You're going to get a lot of like, well, you could get sulfur, but you also could get like heavy minerals where you need to get a water softener. And if you don't, it'll actually ruin your pipes if you don't do anything about it. It's caustic, right? So you can get any of that stuff. Our local place, you can, as a realtor, actually just put some water. Do you want it tested inside? Do you want it tested outside? It's all different. Like, do you want to make sure the water out of the faucet is good after the filtration system you have in? Or do you just want to make sure that the water coming out of the ground, like the hose that you have outside that's before it gets to the house, that that's safe? So you have to ask your client, where do you, if you have a house, where do you want this test done? And do you want it tested in different places? And the test itself is like $20. It's not very expensive. And our local place, you have to get it to them by 4 p.m. on a certain day. And it's this environmental place you take it. It's San Juan Basin Health. It's the same people that do septics. They send it out to a state lab and they can test it for anything. I think they can locally test it if it's going to make you sick, like the poop in the water kind of thing. I can't remember what those things are called, chloroform, like all those bad things that come from dead animals and cattle. Those are the local ones you can test for like $20. Now I sent it off and wanted the full analysis for sulfur and all these things. Like, do I have too much iron in my water? Is my toilet going to turn red from the iron in the water? That kind of thing. Or your sink, bathtub. That's going to be more like, it used to be $125. So let's say like $150 for the test, but it's cool. You get like a 3-page report on all the different kinds of things that are in your water. And then you can give it to a Culligan and they can tell you how to get those things out of the water. Do I need this? Do I just need a sediment filter? Just know that anything they find in water, you can pretty much assure that there's a filtration system for it. Out in our super rural areas, like Hesperus, you're going to have, God, I don't remember any of these poisons. It's one of those like terrible poisons that happens when you see the white sheen on a like overgrazed farm. You'll see that white, like salty looking stuff. It's got something in it that's really toxic, but you can get these filtration systems that, what is it? It's like, it kind of boils the water and you're getting the stuff from it. I don't remember all the names of it. It costs a lot of money for anything you're trying to get out over a certain amount. Like if you need a sediment filter, you can spend $4,000 on a great Culligan filter and have amazing water. But if you're trying to get this like really bad stuff out, you can still do it. Don't feel like, oh, the wells, I can never get this stuff out. You probably can get anything out of your water, maybe not gas and oil type chemicals. But anyway, there's also local labs that will test for the other stuff. Like we have oil and gas industry. So they are actually required in Colorado to test all the wells that are around a certain area from gas drilling to make sure that these wells, their gas well, which is like, if this is your water well, the gas well's all the way down here. It's like 10,000 feet deep, but they want to make sure that there's no gas getting into the water. So they'll test it for those people. But you can also, if your person's freaked out about oil and gas and they're 3 miles from the nearest gas pump jack, you can still take it to somebody and get it done. Around here, it's called Green Analytical. That's the name of the company. But they do it all day. It just might take you a while to get the test back. And it's expensive to test for certain chemicals because they have to have a certain test for it. But just know that that exists. Trying to think of anything else you might need to know about a well. Anything you guys can think of? Questions? Yeah.
Yeah, just on that one. So the gas and oil well company will pay for the test to the well, and who do you go to for that?
I don't think so. Green Analytical, if they don't already have that, but if you are close to a pump jack, I don't know if it's a state rule or if it was like, we used to have BP was the company that owned most of the wells around here, and so it might have been a BP thing that they were just trying to be nice. But I do know that a lot of people the company would pay to get their well tested in a certain routine. So let's say it was once every 6 months or once every 3 months, and I have no idea why that happened, but it just seemed that anyone who was in those areas that was pretty close, like down on County Road 213 or these places south of town, they'd be like, oh yeah, my well gets tested every 6 months. So here's all the reports from it. I'm like, wow, they pay for that? So I have no idea, but I guess if you're on the seller side, just ask if you're on the seller side, say, hey, does anybody test? I noticed there's a pump jack out there. Do you have any sort of like testing of your well? And if they're on the buyer side, just ask the seller, do you have any well reports, like any water reports? And if not, we'll just get it done.
Thanks.
Any other questions about wells? Let me see if there was anything else up there. And Emmy, I know I wanted to make sure I hustled through that with wells, because that's more important than the septic right now. Septic, you're going to end up taking a class real soon.
I took a huge class from Mountain, so I feel pretty good.
You did, so you're fine on the septics. Do you have any other questions about the septics or about wells? Okay.
No, just a comment. Like if you have an equestrian property, that is a huge thing, because I have a friend up in Sweetwater Springs who had her well tested for like drinkability, but not for, I think, like the heavy metals. And her horses were constantly colicking. And it turned out that it was a well issue. So she's now in a cistern. So I think not only for like human consumption, but if you have animals, that is a huge thing to get the well tested.
That's a great idea, and knowing that is very helpful. Nick, do you have are there a lot of properties that have cisterns in your areas? Do you have people that just don't have good wells?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't quite got that far.
So know that exists. So if you're in an area that has really bad wells that are drilled, like, okay, the person might go down 1,500 feet and that's going to cost you 20 grand. I don't know. Like the cheapest well you're going to get is $10,000. Like it is very expensive to do a well. But what if you dig all that way and then you can't even find water? Like that would be horrible, right? So you have people that say, you know what, forget it. I'm just doing a cistern. We have tons of places that you can call. And it, as much as it feels so horrible, if you used to having turned on a faucet and you could just run it, there are companies that'll just put you on every week. They just come and fill it. It's just like it's propane or any of these other things you have. So it doesn't mean that you can make somebody feel better about that if they're not used to it, but know that you shouldn't freak out if it's really hard to get a property to appraise if it doesn't have anything more than a cistern, because they have to use other properties like that around. That can be a real challenge, but know that exists and that's a real thing. And they just call, there's like Well on Wheels, all these companies, and they just have it come and fill it up. You also see a ton of people with the cistern in the back of the car, but that's less common. You're usually just dealing with people that, or unless they're filling up the cistern just for the animals, but they just know that that's a thing that actually exists. And so, Emmy, I know you have to get going, so I'm going to go talk about septics, and know that if you have other questions, just call.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, you guys.
Absolutely. So with septics, that is much more. So our state, do you have septic rules at closing, Nick?
Yes.
Okay. So we do too. We have the rules change over the years. There are properties out there that are no longer legal for septic. So it was back in the day, you could put a septic on a half acre, and then it changed to an acre. And so all the half acre properties couldn't sell their property because there was no way to put a septic on it unless they bought their neighbor's property. And then it kind of went back to the half acre thing, because now they have these crazy expensive systems that you can actually have it all enclosed and there's no leach field at all. It's all like right in there. I guess, I don't know how that works. But so it kind of, the law goes back and forth, but they're just trying to make it is a really big deal when septics are, when something is not working with a septic, especially if you have a well. So just know it's highly regulated. There's, they used to do around here a lot of lagoons, which is where you have a tank and then you have a big pond of the stuff, the effluent that comes off the top of the septic. So you have, what do you call it? The black water that goes to the bottom. And then, most of the stuff that's going into septic is from your shower. So that kind of comes off the top and goes into a pond. And now those things here are illegal. You can still have the old one, but you can't do it anymore. So everybody's got these infiltration systems and a lot of things can go wrong. So in our area, we need to be certified before you transfer property. I think, and there are exceptions to that, but almost always you need to do it. And you just have to kind of get it in your mind that if you cannot forget to ask if there's a septic, just make sure you don't forget. I've seen a lot of people who are newer agents that go, I just forgot to put a septic clause in here. And I'm like, oh my God, because you're talking about thousands of dollars. Like who's going to do the test? Who's going to get the repairs fixed if there's something wrong with it? I think it's a great thing that we started to do testing of septics. It used to be that you had to just, well, do you want to get your septic tested or are you good? Like, do you care? And most people would ask you to at least empty the tank and get it inspected, but that was about as much as they did. Know that you also have to keep in mind that if you have a listing coming up and you have any sort of septic thing that has to happen before closing, and Nick, your area, our area, it's September and they want to list in November, or it's October and they want to list in December, get that stuff done. You don't want to have like 5 feet of snow and then your poor seller has to hold on. I'm trying to. then you have your whole septic that has to be, you have to put money into an escrow account so that you can do it in the spring. And that is just the biggest pain in the butt. Not always, sometimes the buyer will take it on, but just know that. I have to tell you, since it's all regulated and you have to take a class in this stuff, I'm going to just tell you the basics. Not all inspectors are the same. I have terrible stories of, I had a top agent come in here. He's been in business 30 years. And he said, I got a bill for the septic tank being pumped and I'm pretty sure they didn't do it. And I'm like, well, how do you think so? He goes, I had like some soil over the whole thing and it's still sitting there in the same exact spot. And so I jacked it open and it sure looks like there's something in there. So I was like, well, like somebody charged them $1,000 or whatever it is, $800 to get it done. And they didn't even do it. So just know that exists. Like maybe they did the neighbor's property. Maybe they just lied. Who knows? So make sure you try to have, it's just like an inspector, make sure you have those 3 people around you that you can tell these are the better companies. We actually happen to have we have an agent that was in here that went into the septic business. I mean, instead of selling real estate, he wants to do that, but he has a great company and he does a whole concierge where he'll get you right to closing and he does all the paperwork and everything to you. We have clauses in our area that have to be put in the contracts. Hazel, I know you know this, but you have to use those clauses that say who's going to pay for what. So Nick, if you ever were curious about what our clauses say, but your laws are probably so different that you don't need to be using ours. So what I always wanted to, you have to keep thinking about, or do you want to get this done before you're listing? If you're on the listing side, in this kind of market, I would not be worried about getting septic stuff, well stuff done before closing or before listing, because the property is going to sell. In a different market, if you have a timed thing where I'm going to get this done before closing, I need to get this done before closing. The test is only good for 1 year and you're in a crappy market. You might not want to get it done before you put it on the market, because what if it doesn't sell and then you got to do the whole test again? So keep all those things in mind. Keep in mind the seasonality. And if it's going to start snowing, you want to get it done right away. What I always I want to kind of end with this is when you're in real estate, you're going to make mistakes. There's always a ton of mistakes that you will make as a realtor. But I always wanted to keep my mistakes to what my commission was in the deal. Because I could always sleep at night knowing that I messed up, but here's my money. Like, I don't want to make anything on this. Use this towards the mistake. And most of my mistakes, it's like a couple $100. I forgot to put a cleaning clause in there. Here, I'm going to just pay for the cleaner. Septics and wells, your commission is not going to cover it. So be really, really careful when you're dealing with big systems of properties that you're telling people where to go, you're giving them the right numbers, and you're not forgetting things like that. Because if you come into the office and tell me you forgot that, it's going to be a lot more serious. And then I will impart with you that you should be an expert in the basics of it. I wish I could go into a lot of like how to find the permits and stuff. Hazel, I know you know that in my area, but Nick, I just don't know. Peggy, I don't know your areas enough to tell you where to go. But I do know that for us, the state regulates wells. The state probably regulates these septic things, but it is a local level. So our county is the one that is the regulator of these, and they will search. They are so diligent that they search for the transfer deeds, and then they go and double check that the person has gotten a septic transfer permit. And you have a huge fine if you forget that. But it's all on a local level. So we call local people for that. And if we have wells there, it's a state office, but there is a local person you can call that has a local office that you can just literally walk into. But you should be just a basic expert in the rules and know that rules change over the years. So if you're telling people that this is the way it is, and then the rule changes next year, just be aware that that's not your fault. It happens, but be careful of saying, oh yeah, you don't have to worry about that down the rule round. I've had people that have, when the septic rules were about to change, I can't remember it was in our office, it wasn't me, but let's say the septic rule was changing that you were going to have to require this whole other thing. And the person didn't want to build their house just yet, but you better believe that I had agents that told their people to get the septic system done, because the approval of the septic would be, maybe it was like they just had to pull the permit. They didn't have to put the thing in, but if they pulled the permit this year, then they were good on the old rules. And if they waited, then they'd have to go through this whole other rigmarole. And they would have blamed the agent saying, you never told me this. So just be really careful with this sort of thing, that you're kind of telling people what to do in that way. I know that's like the most basic kind of ever class in septics. It's mostly on wells, but do you have any particular questions, Nick, Hazel, Peggy, on the septic part?
No.
No, that was super helpful. I have one client, potential client, who isn't in need of financing, and he's got family money and he wants to buy land and he wants to build. And so like, that's been the one thing I've been focusing on. And there's this one area he's looking, and I've showed him literally every piece of land available, and nothing is speaking to his heart. But when it does,
that guy, the young guy.
Exactly. So I'm still working on that. But when it does, when his heart is invested, I'm going to need to be up on wells and septics and all that stuff. So this was really helpful.
Thank you. I just thought that made me think of something else that I should point out. So if you have a Google mapping system, or if you don't, and there's any way you can do this through paper, it still is very advisable. Here's the same property that I'm bringing up. These are all 1 acre lots, so it's a perfect place to do it. If he chose to get a property, let's say he did this one, they actually have a well, but it's so old. We didn't have to start permitting until the 70s. So if you have an old well, it just doesn't have a permit number. Nobody went back and did it. But let's say this is a vacant lot and all the people around them have houses, and they want to know, like, how deep are the wells? It is totally valid to check on all these wells around it and say, how deep are they? And how well are they doing? Okay, so then if you have an anomaly, let's say there's like out of 10 of these, 8 of them have 4 gallons a minute, and they're only 200 feet deep, and it looks like they were done in the last 20 years. They're not like 50-year-old wells. You're probably kind of accurate, knowing that the aquifer around here is probably going to be about that. Now, so that's helpful to that person. And you just have to have a caveat, like they're all different. But if you're on this one, this is a ranch. So this is probably more what he's looking at, are these big properties. So if you're looking at this one and there's another big ranch over here, it's too far away, So you can say, well, the ones around it happen to be, there's a bunch of little places across the way, but like you're sitting right next to a river here. So you might be better because the water's probably, it's probably really close to the surface. But up here on the mountain, you might not want to say that there's real good water up here because you're looking down near the river and it looks like the wells are good there. So it's all about like where the water sits. And I also know if you tend to have an area you've sold other houses and they tend to have sulfur or any of these other bad things, it can be in the whole entire area. So it is something you want to disclose. Is like, I have known other people that have had sulfur in the area. So you just want to talk to a well driller and really understand what you're up against when you're putting in a filtration system and stuff like that. So, but yeah, no, that'll be helpful for him because his heart is speaking to him. Nick is telling me he's younger, he has the money, he has the time, so he just wants to wait for his heart. That's good. Well, thank you all for joining me. I can't remember what we're doing next week, but it's not wells and septic. So I'll write you an email and let you know. Have a great day.